questions, please enter them into the chat function of GoToWebinar, and we'll save time to answer some of those questions a little bit later.
So welcome everyone. I'm Rachel Field. I'm the Director of Leadership and Diversity at Women's World Banking. We are delighted you can join us for Women's World Banking's celebration of 10 years of offering training and leadership development. As more institutions globally seek gender parity within their organizations, we believe there's a lot to learn from financial institutions that are committed to serving women and know that to do that effectively, they need diverse, well-trained teams. This is our second webinar in a year-long series. Women's World Banking is a global nonprofit. We're dedicated to providing low-income women with the financial products they need to achieve security and prosperity. Over 1 billion women around the world don't have access to the most basic financial products that we often take for granted, a savings account, insurance, or a loan to grow her business. At Women's World Banking, we work with 40 financial institutions in 29 countries to make sure that women have access to a full suite of financial services, including a safe place to save, insurance to protect against health emergencies, and opportunity to grow her business. To support these innovative institutions, we provide leadership development and advisement on gender diversity. We're glad to have you all here for what is going to be an interesting discussion on women's representation within financial services institutions. Women's World Banking recently partnered with Bloomberg on their Financial Services Gender Equality Index, which we will discuss in detail momentarily. At Women's World Banking, we know that gender diverse teams have better business outcomes and are more innovative, both of which are critical for our network member institutions to meet the financial needs of the more than 1 billion unbanked women globally. We also believe in the importance of data to demonstrate the business case for serving women clients and promoting women internally. So I'd like to now introduce our panelists. Happy to welcome Angela Sun, Head of Strategy and Corporate Development for Bloomberg. In this capacity, Angela works directly with Mike Bloomberg and the Management Committee and oversees business development, acquisitions, and partnerships spanning the company's media, financial products, enterprise and data businesses, as well as strategic planning, performance management, and company-wide initiatives. From 2008 to 2014, she served as Chief of Staff to former Bloomberg CEO and President Dan Doctoroff. Prior to joining Bloomberg, Angela served as a Senior Policy Advisor in the Bloomberg administration under Deputy Mayor Daniel Doctoroff, where she oversaw a citywide portfolio of economic development agencies and led urban planning and real estate development products. She's also worked at McKinsey and JP Morgan. We are also happy to welcome Kathryn Burdett. Kathryn is Vice President, Head of Diversity and Inclusion, Deutsche Bank Americas. She is responsible for setting regional strategy and directing its implementation. She serves as a trusted advisor to the regional CEO, regional deputy CEO, and regional head of HR, and guides the regional senior leadership diversity and inclusion council. Additionally, Kathryn oversees 5 employee resource groups, steers program content for internal and industry franchise events, and manages relationships with external expert partners. Prior to joining B&I, Kathryn was a founding member of the employee relations team and was dual-hatted as the U.S. Graduate Training Program Manager for the HR division. She also spent several years in the HR business partner and HR international functions. So welcome to you both again. As we can see, we already have a wealth of knowledge to tap into with both of you. So again, as I said, I'll be moderating, and I'll also share some experiences from Women's World Banking, where we've been working with institutions for 10 years to ensure women have access to leadership training and also doing gender diversity assessments to help institutions analyze and gather data and determine what actions need to be taken to improve and maintain workforce diversity in the organization and ensure women are represented at all levels. So what I'd like to do now is turn over to Angela, who's going to give us some more information about the Bloomberg Index. Angela?
For inviting us to join. I wanted to start off and just give you a sense of how the GEI actually came about. This was an idea that was actually brought to me by Mary Ellen Iskandarian. Many of you know her as the CEO of Women's World Banking, and I serve on her board. So about a year ago, Mary Ellen raised an observation from one of Women's World Banking's supporting banks, citing that there is just such a dearth of hard data around gender equality. And in the same vein as the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, which has gained significant traction in the past 15 years, we thought there ought to be an index that benchmarks where companies stand on women and gender issues in the same way that the DJSI evaluates sustainability performance of the largest companies in their total stock market index. So it made perfect sense for Bloomberg to take on this effort, both to develop and to maintain the index, since our company is founded on the principle of bringing transparency to the markets through access to information. And one of our commitments that we make to investors is that we continually identify and bring clarity to opaque areas of the market. And ESG data, particularly those related to social information and gender equality, though that's one of the areas that heretofore has not been talked about as much. So it made sense that we address this real gap in data on gender as it relates to company. Now, the slide that you see on the screen is just a few of the data points that suggest and support the need for a gender equality index. We're all familiar with the issue of the wage gap. The National Women's Law Center, which one of our partner organizations that gave us valuable insight in this process, they estimate that women lose close to $450,000 over the course of a 40-year career. And Rachel also mentioned earlier that 1.1 billion women are unbanked and lack access to financial services. And finally, we're reaching a critical mass of research and studies that show the economic value that gender parity can bring. Many of you may be familiar with the McKinsey study, which estimates that $12 trillion can be added to global GDP. So on the next slide, you can see what we think is distinctive about the GEI. If we can switch to slide 3, we see this not simply as a diversity. If we can just back up one slide, please. We see that the GEI is not just a extension of HR practices and focusing on diversity and inclusion, but rather it's meant to be a Bloomberg product that's put in front of investors. And these investors who are our clients are increasingly relying on ESG data to evaluate company reputation, value, and performance. And all of this, of course, is to make more informed decisions. So when you look at this pie chart, I want to say that we were very deliberate about methodology. Rather than relying exclusively on public data, we engaged directly with companies about their policies and practices and what they're undertaking in terms of the goals they're setting and achieving on the gender equality front. And our index is basically based on a survey that focuses on 4 areas. We think of this as really an ecosystem that supports getting to gender parity. So you'll see that the first segment is around a company's internal gender statistics, and that had about a 35% weighting in the survey. This includes statistics such as board, executive, management breakdown by gender, and a firm's commitment to D&I in the workplace. If we could go back to slide 3, we're still walking through the pie chart. The second area is on company policies. These include a company's benefits around parental care, either training or coaching for women, retention efforts, flexible work practices, and so forth. The third area we looked at is around products. This goes beyond a company's own employees and asks the question, what are companies doing to create financial resources and opportunities, whether for women clients or for women-owned businesses. And the last segment that informed our study, or our survey rather, is community engagement. This looks at the company's support for organizations focused on gender equality. So this can mean sponsoring educational programs, supporting gender equal legislation, or supporting organizations that advocate for gender equality or supplier diversity programs. And the way that we went about creating the index is that we scored companies along these 4 dimensions, and those that scored above a threshold based on disclosure and the data requirements, they were included in the index, and that was normalized on a market cap basis. Now, if you turn quickly to slide 4, this gives you a sense of our universe. And at the outset, we are focused on public companies with a market cap of 15 billion or greater, with at least one security actively traded on the on a U.S. exchange. And we also focused on financial services to begin with, which made sense given our client base, and it made sense to address industry-specific practices or issues, which we think will help peer groups understand how they compare to one another. But already in 2016, we're discussing how to broaden the index to other sectors for future years. And just on the last slide, slide 5, this gives a list of the 26 financial services firms that make up our inaugural group of index members. So want to give a shout out to them, and these are firms that are one, leading the conversation in terms of disclosure and in terms of many of the best practices that they espouse in advance.
Angela.
So I can pause here.
Thank you, Angela. Curious to hear just a little bit about some of the findings. So specifically with regard to policies in the workforce for participating financial services firms, any interesting or specific findings you'd like to tell us about?
Sure. I mean, there are really many findings that we discovered through this process. Too much for me to cite all of them that appeal to us data geeks here at Bloomberg. But let's turn to slide 7, and I'll highlight just a few. We found that while in the overall financial services industry, only 12% of corporate board members are women, whereas when you look at our GEI member firms, that average is much higher, with 26% of women on their boards. However, you see a big 0 in the middle of the page. There were no female CEOs among index members, and Banco Santander was the only firm that had a female chairperson. So there's still a lot of work to be done there. One of the most interesting statistics, and reflecting the reality that women are still getting stuck in middle management, is that GEI member firms on average have reached parity in their overall workforce. So they have 50% female employees, but among that, only 14% of executives at these firms are female. And when you compare this to Bloomberg's World Index, which captures data from 1,000 global firms across sectors, you'll see that overall workforce representation is approximately 36% women, with 12% at the executive level. And what this tells us is that financial services firms may be ahead of the market in overall workforce parity, but that the challenge of promoting women up the rank is even more acute proportionately in our GEI firms. Women are either not being promoted or they're dropping out voluntarily. So there are many more that I'm happy to share, but these 3 we think told the story of what we're seeing within the GEI and in the overall industry.
Great, thank you, Angela. Let's explore a bit more, dig a little bit deeper into the fact that women are getting stuck at middle management within financial institutions. So, Kathryn, does this data resonate with you? Do you see similar data at Deutsche? And what are your thoughts around why women are getting stuck in middle management?
Sure. I'd just like to say, good morning to everyone. Thank you, Rachel, and to the Women's World Bank. I'm delighted to participate, and thank you to Angela for teeing that all up. Deutsche Bank is very proud to be part of the inaugural Financial Services Gender Equality Index. So to answer your question, absolutely this data resonates. At Deutsche Bank, our board is 35% female, and we have made progress in terms of the percentage of female representation at our top 2 corporate title levels, which since 2010 has increased to now being 20.5%. And the overall percentage of female officers has increased to 32.5%. So while we are pleased with our representation and what we've achieved, the rate of progress is still very slow. And we do indeed still see challenges in the pipeline that Angela alluded to. From our perspective, this is due to a variety of factors. I think certainly there are some structural challenges, such as the impact that unconscious bias has on systems and processes, as well as on an individual level. We know that bias has entered our views of leadership style and definitions of success. We know that there are a variety of things that impact this. So for example, research has shown us that women are promoted or given opportunities based on their performance, while men are promoted and given opportunities based on their potential. This is certainly a different standard that disparately impacts women's rate of progress. We do see some attrition at that middle management level. The conventional wisdom is often that women are leaving at the midpoint in their careers because that timing coincides with maternity leave or family responsibilities. And while to some extent the timing is certainly related, what we have seen is women are not leaving the workforce. They are making other choices. And we know that they are going to other companies or other industries, particularly for different and better opportunities. We also know that some things around flexible or agile working is playing into this. And we know, of course, that the burden of managing demanding work schedules as well as family responsibilities such as elder care and child care fall disproportionately on women. So there are a lot of challenges here that are contributing, to the leaky pipeline and to the slow progress of women.
Women's World Banking actually worked with a microfinance institution that wanted to increase both the percent of women clients served as well as the percent of women working as staff. And so after extensive research and interviews and focus groups with a broad range of staff from that organization, the team found a strong and professional organization certainly capable of meeting those goals. But despite that, they've not been successful at achieving the targets set by leadership in the area of gender diversity. And what the research revealed is that one of the barriers to achieving an increase in women staff at all levels were the beliefs that were held and reiterated quite often that women get married and leave. Women leave more often than men. And so because of this belief, many managers, even if unconsciously, preferred not to hire women. And clearly, as you mentioned, there's a confluence of factors that come into play, and certainly in this particular country, there were definitely some cultural constraints that women faced in the workforce. But what was interesting when we actually lifted up the cover and looked at the analysis, the reality was that men were actually leaving at a much higher rate than women. And so we see that in some of the dynamics that you're talking about. We see that in our member institutions as well.
Absolutely, but of course, while men are leaving at a higher rate, they're overrepresented. So it's not necessarily resulting in the proportional progress that you would hope for, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So a lot of banks have different kinds of programs around work-life balance, mentorship, diversity in the hiring pool. Curious to hear both of your thoughts on those different kinds of interventions. What do you see as working well? What can we do more of?
Sure. So from my perspective at Deutsche Bank, there are some key things that have made a difference. I mean, first of all, using the data to bust the myths and identify the real issues in order to develop strategies that work is critically important, because that conventional wisdom that we talked about why women leave and so forth is so prevalent and so deeply ingrained that we really have to demonstrate, no, this, in fact, that's not really what's happening. There's more to it than that. But what we have seen to be particularly successful, and I would say is really more successful than mentorship. Mentorship is certainly important, and mentorship can be key to development, to getting input and outside perspectives as you shape and navigate your career, particularly at the early levels, and support. Really the key is sponsorship and advocacy. So who is advocating for you when you're not in the room? To address this, Deutsche Bank has developed some specific programs. We have 2 award-winning global programs for women. One of them is called our Atlas program, which stands for Accomplished Top Leaders Advancement Strategy. And this is a program that is for our top level, corporate title level of women. And what we do is we select a small cohort of women approximately every other year and provide them with bespoke development opportunities, coaching, feedback, and exposure to senior management in a very focused and robust way. We've had 56 women participate in this program since it launched in 2009, and we have a success rate of 50% of those women having taken on more responsibility, and some of them more than once. So we're already talking about the top title level, and it's a continuation of increase in responsibilities, and that's really the purpose of the program, is to help get top women into even broader roles. We have another program called Women Global Leaders that we have designed and delivered in partnership with INSEAD Business School, and this is for our 2nd highest corporate title level. And this is a 1-week residential program at INSEAD. And we've had, since we established it in 2010, we've had approximately 210 participants, and 1 out of 2 of those participants has been promoted to our highest corporate title level within 3 years of completion, which is certainly a better promotion rate than the average rate. Some other things that we found particularly successful is we developed a tool in 2013 that was called Justify. It was cited by Oliver Wyman in their Women in Financial Services report in 2014. And this tool asked managers to apply 5 tips on leadership behavior that have been identified as being the most effective in getting diverse employees to the next level. And as a result of those 5 tips, which really center on getting people real experience, exposure, not taking no for an answer. So when women are offered an opportunity and perhaps their first inclination is to turn it down because they're more risk averse, is managers really being clear with them about how they will succeed and what support for them, what support is there. And lastly, of course, it's giving the feedback. So using this tool, some of our businesses implemented some bespoke initiatives that really emphasized the development planning, the identification of skill gaps, whether those are technical skills or whether those are some other softer or client skills that perhaps may be lacking. Emphasizing sponsorship and, of course, opportunities for exposure with senior management. And these initiatives leveraging the Justify tool, some of which were transparent and communicated as a program, and others were more behind the scenes at a management level, have been highly successful in terms of both promotion and retention of high-performing women. So that's really what we see as the key, is the development planning and the sponsorship.
Kathryn, thank you for those examples. You've given us some real concrete things to think about, and also appreciate your transparency in discussing Deutsche Bank's data. Angela, what thoughts do you have around this, around some of the things that organizations can do to really get at, again, this kind of getting stuck at middle management that we're seeing?
Sure. I think Kathryn's point about using data to bust the myth is exactly what's needed as a first step. And this is what Bloomberg can offer as a data aggregate. We don't take a normative position about what works and what doesn't, but we can provide the data and track the progress and hopefully over time see what correlations we can make between the raw data and individual company performance. And that's really the ultimate goal of the GEI in supporting change. But I can share some of the stats that were disclosed, which are quite encouraging among the GEI members. And this points to the commitments many of the firms have made in advancing the gender conversation and gender consciousness, many of which Kathryn just cited. So one of the stats that I found was remarkable was that 85% of our index members currently have a chief diversity officer or an equivalent role. And obviously that shows that this diversity and gender equality are increasingly becoming important, something that firms need to pay attention to, something that is important to the talent that they're trying to recruit, and that shows up in the numbers. 54% less, but still a meaningful number, actually track the percentage of women in revenue-producing roles. And that's something that I think firms generally acknowledge they need to get better at, and there's also a definitional issue at play where, again, Bloomberg can help. Another topic that you, Rachel, talked about is the prevalence of unconscious bias. And certainly at Bloomberg, it's something that was raised several years ago, but people are just beginning to understand. And we were encouraged to find that 85% of the firms within our GEI actually train managers on how to recognize and how to eliminate unconscious bias. So that's a step in the right direction. And just a couple of other statistics that were remarkable. 92% of firms have a recruiting strategy in place to increase female new hires, and 46% of firms actually calculate or disclose participation in mentoring programs. So I completely agree with Kathryn's point that mentorship and sponsorship really are two areas that firms are paying attention to in thinking about how to reduce the effect of being stuck in middle management. One point of feedback, though, that I should point out is that even with the firms that have very conscientious policies in place, the one area that is still opaque is just how well used these policies are. And just because a benefit or a program or education is offered doesn't mean that employees take advantage of them. So this is an area that we need to pay attention to.
And so to piggyback on that, you know, in terms of having policies in place and do people take advantage or not, curious to hear, let's go back to Kathryn, what's the role of culture in an organization in terms of how this all connects back to gender diversity and parity?
Well, culture is of course critical, because to Angela's point, you know what happens, what's offered on paper, and what happens, you know, in the day-to-day can be two different things, which is why so many of Deutsche Bank's diversity inclusion efforts operate on multiple levels. So there is the policy and benefit aspect. There's the communication and sharing success stories and raising awareness efforts. There are the grassroots efforts through our employee resource groups that really help to shape the culture and the experience of people and provide opportunities for connectivity among employees, which is, you know, critically important in an organization like Deutsche Bank that is so large and so distributed and diffuse in terms of you know, multiple locations, cultures, 145 nationalities that work here globally, those kinds of things. So we do have to create the right kind of inclusive culture so that people feel that they are supported and that they can, in fact, you know, bring themselves to work, bring their whole selves to work, get the support of the people that they work with in order to, you know, to be successful. And we know through research that that's, you know, that's absolutely demonstrated as being key, not only to, you know, retention of women or representation, you know, but overall when we look at the bottom line, right? We know that cultures that are diverse and inclusive lead to greater innovation, which leads to improved bottom line results. So it's a very important factor. And to talk about the unconscious bias, you know, training, for example, we're very proud in the United States last year that we had over 300 of our top leaders go through a workshop on unconscious bias that was really focused on how insider-outsider dynamics impact teams, and really getting to the tangible action plans that individual managers can take to really make a difference in their teams.
And Kathryn, you mentioned the connection to the bottom line. I'd like to ask Angela to speak a little bit about, in terms of financial services firms serving women clients, women-owned businesses, could you comment on any findings derived from GEI data in terms of the bottom line?
Sure. If we can flip over to slide 9, there are a couple of interesting findings on financial inclusion. One is that 73% of GEI member firms offer or fund lending, savings, or other financial products that are geared specifically to women-owned businesses. Another thing that we saw was that 77% of firms also indicated that they allocate specific resources for both retaining and increasing the percentage of female clients in any of its businesses. So there's definitely an awareness there in terms of the products and services that are being offered to their female users. It was very encouraging for us to see that firms are recognizing the need to support women clients as well as potential clients and women-run businesses. Another interesting finding was that 6 firms disclosed that they are gender disaggregating their repayment rates as a method to better understand their female client base and better serve women based on their needs. And lastly, as you can see from the slide, 81% of firms indicated that they sponsor financial education programs for women in their communities. And this again goes back to the idea of the ecosystem I mentioned earlier, that education is one of the first steps in giving access to the 1.1 billion unbanked women that you, Rachel, cited. And this is particularly true in the developing world.
I want to be able to open this up to questions. I think we've already gotten a few. One of the questions that came in continuing this conversation, Kathryn, does Deutsche Bank link the success of the initiatives that you've described to the bottom line?
Yes, absolutely. I suppose it's a little challenging to articulate to you, exactly how that's quantified, and I would say that that is, part of why we were eager to participate in the Gender Equality Index, because, as Angela outlined, that was some of the need for this type of information is that it is hard to track. But we know that it does. Deutsche Bank has also been included in the PACS Elevate Fund, for example. So there's becoming more and more methodologies for this.
And I can add a little bit about what we hope will be the impact of the GEI over time. As I mentioned earlier, we really think of this as a tool to inform investment strategies and decisions and to encourage disclosure more broadly. And just as environmental data was a novelty 10 years ago, today it's become far more standardized and almost table stakes for companies. So you think of what LEED did for sustainable and energy-conscious buildings. Most of you are aware that LEED created a metric and in doing so changed behavior across companies. And so for most new major real estate developments today, and particularly true in New York, companies simply build into the equation that they will create a LEED certified space for their employees, and that obviously has tangible environmental impact. And in the same vein, we hope that the GEI will create a similar virtuous cycle for gender, that in parallel with the many studies that most of you are familiar with, which show the economic value of women, we hope that Bloomberg can provide the data that supports why promoting gender parity makes business sense. It's not just a question of whether women add value, but it's answering the question of how much more can women add, and do they add to the workplace and to society when they reach levels of parity. So we have a saying at Bloomberg, which is a favorite of our founder: if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, and if you can't manage it, you can't fix it. So again, it comes back to data, and we hope this index will equip managers and investors, as well as people who are writing about these issues. Journalists are a big part of the equation. We want to arm them with comparative information on gender equality so that they can pay attention to the business impact of these policies and practices.
Thank you. And Angela, we have a follow-up question that was submitted for you. Is gender equality a driver of performance or an outcome of investments in other areas?
Well, I think that's something that we will need to look at over time, right? There's correlation and there's causation, and as a first step, we want to look at the data. We want to be able to provide the information to the analysts and the researchers that are looking at this day in and day out. And investors, in time, will tell whether this is an input or both an input and an output that has real business impact. And clearly looking at performance and whether the adage of doing well while doing good is in fact true.
And an additional question going back to the data, is there data that is not reflected in the GEI that companies should be collecting? So what should we be looking at?
Sure. Well, there's a lot of data. There's endless information that we can collect and pay attention to. This being year one, we wanted to use the guidance from firms in understanding what data they're collecting, what data are they paying attention to, and we want to clearly push these boundaries over time. So as an example, information on equal pay, that is one area where there's a lot of interest in gathering more information, and it's something that we want to figure out how to put into standardized terms in the next year as we collect the data. If you could actually turn to slide 11, there's one thing that I wanted to share with this group when it comes to collecting data. We found that one of the biggest challenges and one of the most often cited feedback on the survey is one of definition. Even firms that are actively trying to disclose more gender-related data admitted that they ran into difficulty when defining terms. So you look at terms on the left such as management or equal pay or even executives, which facially seem pretty straightforward, but they're not when you start parsing through titles and policies and wage differences. And the fact is that the data is not being comparable is one of the biggest issues, because clearly you can't benchmark when the terms are not standardized. And many of the firms that we spoke to indicated that they didn't understand how their peers were defining terms, and that made them anxious in disclosing their own data. And again, this is where Bloomberg comes in, because we always start with data and we create a discipline around defining and measuring information. And one of the things that we provide is a way to think about standardization and how we socialize it and give guidance to firms so they can understand how to calculate and report data, and as a result have confidence that both the internal and the external peer benchmarking is normalized. So it's a great question in thinking through the data that we want to collect, but as importantly as the fields of data is how we define it and how we give assurance that firms are on equal standing when they disclose.
Thank you. And Kathryn, for you as well, is there specific data that you think is most important to look at? What's some of the data that you pay, a keen attention to as you're looking at progress?
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the data that we already outlined in terms of representation, overall representation in the senior ranks, that kind of thing. But certainly, attrition. Other data that's very helpful is average time in title and comparing that on a gender basis. Analyzing maternity leave data is also important, and that speaks back to the myth busting. Looking at the rate of return, the attrition rate for women who've taken maternity leave, the time in their role following the leave before they are either up or out, as we say. So looking at all of that comparative data is certainly important.
And Kathryn, switching gears a bit, and specifically in your experience at Deutsche Bank, how are you engaging men in this conversation?
Absolutely, men have a critical role to play in all of this, because certainly you can't change a system that is, in large part structured and designed by men without including them in the conversation. That's just not going to happen. So what we have done, we have many senior men, men at all levels really, I shouldn't only say senior men, who are committed to diversity and inclusion, and specifically to supporting and advancing women. So engaging them to be part of the conversations around development planning, sponsorship, awareness of the unique challenges that women face, participating in the unconscious bias and inclusive leadership initiatives that we have, is absolutely important.
And Angela, anything in the GEI findings that speaks to that point around engaging men?
Not specifically, or directly rather, in terms of engaging men, but we do know that women control only 1% of invested capital. This is a stat that I heard at the Council on Foreign Relations in a panel on the global economy and gender equality. And given that small percentage and the need for change, we know that most of the invested capital and the people making financial decisions and investment decisions are men. So this is data that will primarily be put in front of men. And one of the comments is that the move toward gender parity rests on men and boys to advance the conversation and have the consciousness to implement change. So indirectly, again, this is about gender equality and a lot of stats on women, but clearly also directed at men who are making a lot of these financial decisions to pay attention. And with the many employment statistics, the policy statistics, as well as products and community engagement, that's where we're trying to direct this conversation.
And I just would like to remind those on the webinar, please feel free to submit any additional questions you have. In the meantime, Angela, what's next for the GEI?
Well, we've been overwhelmed by the positive reception for the GEI post-launch, and the number of firms who are now coming to us to ask about participation and how they can be included. So even firms outside of the sector we've seen come to us to ask for the survey to gather data that will inform their own diversity strategy. So step one, that is a very encouraging observation, and one that we think will only enhance the index next year. We naturally want to build on this momentum, and we're already planning for GEI 2.0 and the release of this survey this coming September. One thing I alluded to earlier was expanding the universe. And we want to do this both vertically and horizontally. And by that I mean vertically, we want to think about ways where we can expand the universe. And one thing that we've discussed is possibly lowering the market cap requirement from 15 billion to a lower number, recognizing that a lot of innovation in financial services is happening at the regional level. So just last week, for example, I was speaking to the CEO of Diamond Bank in Nigeria, and he was sharing with me the many approaches they are experimenting with to bring more women into their client base, whether it was through technology and mobile banking or through expanded services that begin with women and expand into the community. So capturing that innovation and the banks that are on the forefront is one of the things that we have to consider. Horizontally, in looking at sector expansion, the great news is that we've received a lot of inquiry from people who want to do what we're doing with the GEI and expand it to other sectors. So consumer goods or tech, those are two areas where there's clearly a lot of interest. And there are other sectors that have traditionally been more male-dominated, such as energy or oil and gas, where there are more women that need to be part of the conversation and where change is happening. So the second area that we're looking at is looking at other sectors that we need to expand into for the GEI. And then on the kind of socializing front, we've also had various nonprofits requesting collaboration and for us to share our approach in gathering data and amplifying the results. So that is an ongoing effort, and clearly Women's World Banking is part of that effort. So there's a lot to look forward to. We hope this group stays engaged. We clearly invite the feedback of our GEI members and many of the other firms that are interested to come to us with feedback and suggestions, as well as the members, the participants on today's webinar.
Great, thank you, Angela. We have one additional question that just came in, and we've got time, I think, for this one question, and then we'll wrap up. And it's directed to Kathryn. Are any of the tools that you mentioned publicly available, or are there any case studies that you would point people to help them think through what they can do to take action?
Sure. Our Justify tool is not publicly available for public consumption in terms of the specific steps, but in order to create that tool, we leveraged research by Catalyst that talked about, oh gosh, now I'm forgetting the exact study. I can follow up with you, but I think it was about, it may have been called Hot Jobs, and it had to do with an overemphasis on traditional development programs as not moving the needle, and it really dived into, what are the success factors for advancing women. But so I would definitely encourage people to look at Catalyst. And another, in addition to the Center for Talent Innovation, which has some great research as well. I did, when we were talking previously about the role that men have to play and what is Deutsche Bank doing, speaking of Catalyst reminded me that another way that's important to engage men is to articulate the benefits that men can experience from increased gender equality, or from gender equality, period. And Catalyst has done some great research on that. They did a whole series called Engaging Men, but there are specific ways that men benefit by having, women have, more meaningful roles in the workplace. And a lot of it has to do with some of their personal benefits for men in terms of some of their family relationships, some of the burdens that men also face in terms of gender stereotypes. Men, there's a certain way that men are supposed to behave in our society, and men do suffer from that. So that is another resource that I encourage people to take a look at in terms of, when you're crafting your own strategies, how you can engage men. Everybody likes to know what's in it for me, and I think with often with diversity, there can be a reaction on the part of majority members that it's a zero-sum game, that by advancing women or other underrepresented groups, that the dominant group will lose out, and it really doesn't have to be that way.
Yes, rather than shrinking the pie, you're really expanding it.
Correct.
We have time for just a minute or two for each of you if you'd like to give us some of your closing thoughts. Angela, why don't we start with you?
Well, I just want to say that it's especially conversations such as this one that are so important in advancing gender parity, because it really starts with, obviously, recognition. And that's where we were highly encouraged by the participants. When we started this effort and when Mary Ellen gave me a call, we knew that we could put together the mechanics of an index, but we did not have a sense of the kind of data that we would receive, how responsive companies would be in disclosing this information. Certainly their sensitivity to data around individual company policies and practices. And we were surprised and just delighted that 9 months after we initiated the conversation around the index, that we had so much interest. And now fast forwarding to this year, post-launch, we can see this index only getting bigger and more impactful. And as I said, we started this effort to disclose and bring clarity in information to the gender equality space, recognizing that our clients, investors, and companies are increasingly reliant on ESG data to evaluate reputation, value, and performance. So we hope that just having the transparency, having the data leads to better practices, and that this brings about the virtuous cycle of transparency, allowing for better decision making and ultimately improving lives, which is the bedrock of what this company was founded on.
Great, thank you, Angela. And Kathryn, a few closing words from you as well?
Well, Angela said it so beautifully that it is hard to follow up on that. But I will say that the transparency is critically important, and being able to to monitor data and measure progress is really the only way that is a key way that we'll be able to make change. So Deutsche Bank is certainly proud to have been included in the Gender Equality Index, and I think it really demonstrates the increasing appetite on the part of investors for this type of information, and that also helps us drive our business as we listen to our clients, and we can refine the approaches that we take, particularly on our asset management side and with our financial advisors looking at this kind of information.
Thank you. Well, thank you to you both, Angela and Kathryn, for joining us and sharing your experiences. We also want to thank everyone who's joined us today. We hope it was an engaging conversation and that you feel inspired to ask how you can support gender parity in your workplace. We will be sending an email with a recording of this webinar, and there'll also be a follow-up on Women's World Banking's blog. So check our website or social media to see when that gets posted. And we are also sharing the URLs of each institution so you can find more information. We also urge you to support our newest initiative, Bank on Her Leadership, by sharing on social. So again, thank you very much.